In the early 1960s, black groups like the Shirelles had great success with their carefully crafted studio sound.
Tonight, the light of love is in your eyes. But will you love me tomorrow?
But in 1964, the charts were invaded by British bands, and many of those same black groups stopped having hits. To help compete with the Beatles and regain that wider audience, black musicians would turn back for inspiration to a sound they had grown up with, to give the music soul.
Hate failure, believe me, you're gonna fail.
For the generation who were children in the 50s, gospel churches had provided a memorable musical education.
It's a sound, it's a feeling. It's a different type of feeling that comes forth from people who have been singers in the church.
Ray Charles had already shown how gospel-influenced music could be made to work commercially. His 1954 recording, I Got a Woman, had broken new ground as a celebration of music from the church, but with very secular lyrics.
That's because I got a woman way over town. Good to me. Yes, I have. I got a woman way over town. Good to me. I know. Give me money. I'm in need. We did I Got a Woman. That's where it all started from. Because a lot of people said, oh, that's a religious song, and you just change the words around and this and that. So, and so you're being sacrilegious and you're being this and you're being that and you know. And my answer to that was, at this point, since I've given up trying to sound like Nat Cole, I'm gonna be what I am, and I don't give a damn who like it and who don't. Hear me what I say. Hear me what I say. Oh, what I say. Hear me what I say. Hear me what I say.
The lead singer of well-known religious group the Soul Stirrers had also decided it was time to cross over to stardom. In 1956, gospel idol Sam Cooke went solo.
None of them liked the idea. Sam Cooke, who was one of their idols when he was with the Soul Stirrers, singing pop music. I mean, like my grandmother and her friends in the whole neighborhood, was like, I remember hearing conversations how bad they thought that was, because the young people thought it was great.
At first I thought it was infatuation.
You Send Me was a crossover sensation, reaching #1 and selling nearly 2 million copies. Cooke's artistic and commercial success in turn inspired a young ex-soldier from Detroit.
Coming from his gospel roots, it was like a surprise. It was like the first real person that I knew that just went from gospel to to popular music and stuff. But he was one of the favorites of everybody. You Send Me was just a major smash, and I had long enjoyed simplicity, enjoyed pureness and stuff like that, and he was that. He was pure, he was simple, and great.
Detroit had some flourishing jazz clubs, and Berry Gordy's first venture into the music business had been to open a specialist record store.
In my neighborhood, jazz was not popular at all, but it had been very much a part of my life before I went into the Army and all that, and I was really into it. So when I came out, first thing I wanted to do was go into business and open up a jazz record store, which is what I did. But the people in my neighborhood, they had other ideas. I mean, they wanted Muddy Waters and B.B. King and Fats Domino. I stocked up in blues records, and people came back to buy it, and but it was too late. It was too late to save my store, but it was not too late for me to realize the emotions of people and the simplicity that they loved to hear, and which was always in me all the time.
After the failure of his record store, Gordy worked on a Ford assembly line during the day and, influenced by Sam Cooke, started to write songs by night.
Only teardrops. Come on, come on.
Gordy struck lucky when Jackie Wilson, Detroit's hottest singer, had a hit with a song written by Gordy and a friend of his, Billy Davis.
It was very important to make sure it had crossover potential. It had to have a sound that wasn't threatening to the general audience or the pop disc jockeys or the program directors. Threatening anything that was too funky, too bluesy was a little bit threatening. No, that's not for our audience. Would this would be the spill that you would get. So it was okay for it to have a rhythm and a beat, as long as you didn't get too funky with it.
Early in 1959, with several other hits to his credit, Gordy borrowed $800 from his family and launched what would become the Motown empire. Within a year, Hitsville, USA was home to the #2 song in the charts, Smokey Robinson and the Miracles' Shop Around.
And then she said, just because you become a young man now, there's still some things that you don't understand now. Before you ask some girl for a hand now, keep your freedom for as long as you can now. My mama told me, you better shop around. Oh yeah, you better shop around. Shop around.
It was on the market playing in Detroit on the radio stations. Berry Gordy decided that the rhythm was not, the beat was not proper. He just needed a little bit of a change. He called us about 3 o'clock in the morning and said, I want all you guys to come back to the studio.
Smokey got up and got the rest of the group over to the studio, and we did it. And he said, well, what's wrong? He still didn't know what's wrong. And I said, the tempo is too slow. He said, but we all liked it before. And I said, I don't care about before, but it's just too slow. We've got to perk it up. The piano player didn't show up, and so I ended up playing the piano, and it turned out to be our first million seller.
My mama told me, you better shop around.
The Marvelous Marvelettes.
Wait, oh yes, wait a minute, Mr. Postman. Wait, hey, Mr. Postman. Mr. Postman, look and see. Oh, yeah.
Motown's first #1 record came from another local group fresh from high school. But since many stores would still not display records that showed black faces, the Marvelettes' first album featured a cartoon mailbox. For talent like the Marvelettes, Gordy drew on the tough projects housing estates of Detroit's South Side. He soon had an impressive array of young gospel-trained singers eager to get a break and join the Motown family.
Well, you know he treats me bad.
One of his first stars was Mary Wells. As a 17-year-old, she'd walked into an open audition hoping to sell a song and was quickly signed up by Gordy. who backed her with a young male group called the Temptations.
I love him so. Do you love me? I can really move. Now do you love
The Contours would have one big hit, but they were too rough around the edges to ever fully meet Gordy's crossover requirements.
Can dance. Yeah. Yeah. Watch me now. Hey, work. Woo! I'm working out, baby. Well, now.
Marvin Gaye was the son of a Pentecostal minister. In his early days at Motown, he worked as a session drummer. Then in 1961, he married Gordy's sister, Anna, and was offered a solo recording contract. 12-year-old blind Stevland Morris was rechristened Little Stevie Wonder by Gordy. In 1963, the release of his live recording Fingertips Part 2 made him a commercial success, and Motown quickly marketed him as the 12-year-old genius.
There'll be laughing, singing, and music swinging, dancing in the street, Philadelphia.
Motown's production line of hits was modeled on the car assembly plants its boss had worked on.
Can't forget the Motor City. All we need is music.
Berry Gordy controlled every step of the process, from selection of the artist to their choice of song and the publishing rights. This meant that the organization was strong enough to withstand the Beatles when they came in 1964. Even a former company secretary had a record in the charts.
It's amazing how fast Motown grew. I was only a secretary there for 9 months. But at the end of that 9 months, everybody was famous. Everybody had a record out, and I never looked back. I gave my job to 3 girls from Secretarial College.
Gordy knew, however, that the key for Motown's long-term success was to build up a strong songwriting team. Many of Martha and the Vandellas' early hits were written by 2 brothers from Detroit who had grown up steeped in gospel music.
And you praise his holy.
Eddie and Brian Holland teamed up with their friend Lamont Dozier to write over 20 top 10 songs for Motown.
That's our favorite song right there.
It took me a while to write songs. I couldn't do them real quick. It would take me some time to sort of juggle each word around and this word around, mostly to go for the feeling of it, you know. Not necessarily the rhyming, the feeling, you know, where you could feel it, where you could walk away and it would be sort of a haunting feeling, you know. And my concept was always basically, if you missed 30% or 50% of the lyric, you would still know what the song was about.
Here's your old friendship ring.
Holland Dozier Holland, as the team called themselves, followed Berry Gordy's style of simple lyrics, but with a distinctive musical addition of their own.
At that time, the rhythm was usually buried on a record. You didn't hear it. Just a small pulse, you'd feel it. But when Holland Dozier Holland came on the scene, it became rhythm out front. They had stomping boards. They'd take a board and put on some 2x4 and stand on it and stomp. They'd shake chains, scratch on the wall. They did all kind of sounds and rhythm, and they were just creative. Anything that sounded pretty decent, they'd do.
The Motown sound would never have happened had the musicians not been the skillful guys that they were and the tasty jazz musicians that they were, because they allowed us to be heard. They played special things where you could fit your vocals in just like they fitted their music together. That's the reason for the real grooves that we had, because of the Funk Brothers.
The Funk Brothers was the nickname given to the jazz musicians Gordy had brought in as the Motown session band. The company's young producers used them whenever possible to give their records a leg up on the competition, which often came not from the Beatles, but from just down the hall.
The real competition was within the Motown. the Norman Whitfields, the Smokey Robinsons, the Ivy Joe Hunters, and Mickey Stevenson. That was the real competition, because you felt if you did not come up with that follow-up, somebody would be there, so, oh, the guys missed this time. Let's rush in and cut this. I think we got them. It was that type of thing. So that was really the only true competition that you were really aware of or felt.
Whoever had the hit on the last artist would get the first shot on that same artist again. And so some people had locks on artists, like Smokey had a lock early on Mary Wells, and he also had a lock on the Temptations after The Way You Do the Things You Do.
Smokey sits down at the piano and he passed the lyrics around, and I'm reading the lyrics and I said, what? You got a smile so bright, you know you could have been a candle. I said, that's hokey. But the more I looked, at it, and we started putting the harmony together, I said, this is some pretty clever stuff, even though it was very simple, but it had a nice, unique thing about it. And once we put the voices together and rehearsed it and went in the studio and we heard the track and we put it all together, that was the one.
Well, you could have been anything that you wanted to, and I can tell the way you do the things you do.
And it wasn't until he did a song called Get Ready that didn't make it that big that Norman Whitfield got a shot. And he then came up with a record called Ain't Too Proud to Beg, and it just blew Smokey out of the water.
Ain't too proud to beg, and you know it.
So that's the kind of competition, and everybody was fair game.
Ain't too proud to
Several producers had recorded a young trio from the project called the Supremes, but the group remained hitless for 3 years until Holland Dozier Holland tried a new approach.
We had watched people come into Motown, be signed, and get a hit record and go on. And we were the first female group there. So anyway, when Eddie brought us this song, it was to be our, I think, 12th release, something like that. I heard the song, we heard the song, and at that time I was kind of more or less the spokesperson. I spoke up, And I said, Eddie, we want a hit. This song is not a hit. And I said, it's nothing. It's like, baby, baby, where did our love go? Baby, baby. I said, it's nothing. I said, look at Martha and the Vandellas. We want a hit like theirs. We want a soulful record. And he said, Mary, trust me, this is going to be a hit. I started crying. I was begging the guy, please give us a hit. This is how desperate we had become.
But now that I surrender so helplessly, you know what I mean. Baby, baby, where did our love go? Don't you want me? Don't you want me no more?
The song was the first of 5 #1s running for the Supremes, and they joined the other artists on what had become a company institution, the Touring Motown Review.
How about it, ladies and gentlemen, let's hear it. I'm Smokey Robinson in Star for the Star Review. Thank you, kind of ladies and gentlemen. Join us to the Bill Murray sing Thanks for having the entire show. And don't forget to keep in mind, once again,
The Motown Review, the very first one was 94 one-nighters. That's 3 months of living on a bus. Out of those 94 one-nighters, we had about 3 hotel stays. So it was actually sitting on that crowded bus with a 12-piece band and 8 or 9 acts.
That was also in the days of the Freedom Riders. And when they see this bus, we came to get gas. And as we stepped out of the bus to go to the Johns, we looked down the street and all the little houses along the street had people standing in the doorway. And behind the door was a shotgun.
There were a lot of restaurants that we went in where we had to actually go in the back door and have cold hot chocolate and cold hot dogs. and that's all that we were served.
I remember one place in Texas specifically that we went to the back, and we had to wend our way through the garbage cans to a little window about the size of, oh, I guess about that size. And man, they would put our plates through the, I mean, paper plates through the window, and we ate on the garbage cans.
Oh yes, wait a minute, Mr. Postman. Wait.
But racism was not the only problem Motown faced with its artists.
Oh yeah.
Before any of the tours really were established, Georgiana from the Marvelettes walked out on the stage. They said, "Now the Marvelettes," and she walked out on the stage with her eyes wide and chewing gum and looking at all the people and said, you know, it's just country style. And I said, it's not gonna work. We gotta have a department that would groom the kids. And since most of them were ghetto kids that came from single parent homes, and didn't have all the cultural tactics that's needed, we decided to give it to them.
They asked me to open up the finishing school there, Motown Finishing School. Of course, the youngsters, you know, they came from humble beginning, and some were rude and crude and from the street and the project. But with me, it isn't where you come from, it's where you're going.
She taught us how to be elegant, and that's what we wanted. It wasn't something, we weren't being taught something that we didn't want. We wanted to be better. We wanted to, you know, aspire to be the best. She would say, now, ladies. Golly, we used to hate her then.
She was the brunt of a lot of jokes, I'll say that, because as young girls, we didn't take her seriously. But I did in my heart, and I applied everything she taught me. And I can't really do anything now without thinking of Mrs. Powell. If I sit, if I talk, if I walk, if I carry myself at all, Miss Powell is there.
Marvin Gaye said to me one day, Miss Powell, he called the finishing school a charm school. Miss Powell, I don't think I need a charm school, and I don't think I need any training. I said, Marvin, you don't need as much as some of the other artists, but you do sing with your eyes closed.
I'm a stubborn kind of fella, got my mind made up to love you.
And it gives the illusion that you're singing in your sleep. And number one places around the country, you have to have your eyes open. Then we could improve on your walk because you're leading with your shoulders and your head. Everything had to be done in a classy way. So if they were doing the shake or whatever, well, we didn't do it in a vulgar way. With Diana Ross and the Supremes, we worked on singing and expressing yourself, looking pleasant and with a smile, and maybe a gesture, and how to handle a mic, you see, so that the mic don't handle you. I don't want you ever to look forward, lean forward. You do not protrude the buttocks.
In many cases, the artists just went out and they sang and danced and they jumped around. And they wasn't accustomed to having to be concerned about projection and physical drama. You had to add a lot of movement that would be attractive to the ladies, and the ladies had to do movements that would attract the men.
I've been crying, cause I'm lonely.
Sometimes when I was working with the Supremes on that movement, Mary used to say to me, "You're trying to teach me how to look ladylike," which is exactly what I was doing, because I was giving them moves like very feminine moves where you use your shoulders, wave your hands, and all this kind of business, and keep you so that the fellas are gonna really notice what you're putting down.
We would go into artist development at Motown and work on a song, and it would take hours. And we put in hours every day learning those routines. People have often said that Motown kind of made us over and made us into these sophisticated little dolls, you know. But I think that's something that we brought within ourselves. And so Charlie was able to keep us the way we were, but still keep that sophistication and to keep it sexy and to keep the rock and roll, all that as one unit.
Charlie really started turning up the heat on as far as polishing us and spending more time in artist development, because it got to the point that we would be there so much that, man, we were getting tired of looking at each other. But it was worth it because they were grooming us for the real big stage, the Copacabanas, the Las Vegas, the Atlantic cities, and what have you.
Sometimes we would find that a move might be quite primitive, something that you would see just on the R&B circuit. It would go something like this here. So what we would do for the presentation and the crossover is try to bring it up and give it a little bit more sophistication. It would look something like this here.
By 1967, Motown acts were playing Las Vegas, The Ed Sullivan Show, and many of the biggest venues across the world. Berry Gordy's goal of producing a constant assembly line of sophisticated pop entertainers had become a reality. For many, Motown's success was Black America's success. A musical accompaniment to the quest for equality led by Dr. Martin Luther King.
Where did our love go? Ooh, don't you want me, baby? Don't you want me no more? Ooh, baby.
But to some, the Motor City Company had started to polish its artists too much for white audiences with its cabaret presentation.
With a song in my heart.
For these dissenters, you could still find the real soulful music, but you had to go down south.
I'm gonna wait till the midnight hour. Let's see my love come tumbling down.
What the Temptations did, what the Four Tops did, what Diana Ross and the Supremes did, all of those were top records across the world. But they were da 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 da. But the minute you crossed the Mason and Dixon line and got down here in Memphis, altogether different.
See? You would hear songs at Motown that had the influence of the church in the melody, but they would polish it, and they did a marvelous job at doing that. At Stax, we didn't. We just let it all hang out. We went for it, and whatever it was, that's what it was. Whatever you felt, that's what it was.
Stax Records took its name from founder Jim Stewart and his sister Estelle Axton. An early hit in 1960 by local legend Rufus Thomas and his daughter Carla had convinced Stewart to produce more black music. And in 1965, Stax caught the ear of the legendary Jerry Wexler.
It really turned me on to watch the way they recorded, because it was entirely different from what we had been doing in New York and from what everybody else was doing around the country, which was recording with written arrangements, arrangers, and studio players who read the charts.
You didn't have to prepare music. You'd play the song for them once. The artist could sit down and play or sing them the song once. They learned the song. No music in front of them telling them go from here to there to there. They learned the song. And they had this intimate relationship with each other where if after they listened to the song once, they say, you take the first verse, you do the fills here, I'll stay out, then you can. About 2 or 3 takes, they learned the song faster than you were prepared to record it.
One of the keys to the spontaneity of Stax recordings was the tight rhythm section, Booker T and the MGs. Despite the fact that Memphis in the early 60s was very much a segregated city, the Stax studio band was built around a multiracial quartet.
We just looked away from the fact that it had never been done before, and we just did it. We played the black clubs, and we played the white clubs, and we stayed in white hotels, we stayed in black hotels, we ate in white restaurants and black restaurants, and we broke the rules.
The MGs, along with Stax's horn section and the writer-producer team of Isaac Hayes and David Porter, powered a host of artists, including Sam and Dave, Otis Redding, and a former gospel singer, Jerry Wexler, was producing.
Steal away, I ain't got long to stay here. I said I ain't got long to stay here.
Wilson Pickett sang on a lot of gospel stuff. And one of the things, when he would get into his sort of sanctified groove on the end, you know, he would go, oh, I want to wait till the midnight hour, see my Jesus in the midnight hour, that kind of stuff, you know. It's kind of an ID for this guy, you know.
I would always put that in somewhere in the song, in the midnight hour, in the gospel song. I may meet Jesus. It may be soon in the morning, or it may be in the midnight hour, you see. So that midnight hour thing was kicking around all the time. This there.
That's when my love comes tumbling down. I'm gonna wait till the midnight hour.
Wilson Pickett and Steve Cropper wrote In the Midnight Hour during Pickett's first night in town. The next morning, the record's success was assured when Wexler showed the musicians a new dance he'd seen up north.
There was a dance in New York that we didn't know anything about in Memphis called the jerk. And so when, you know, if you remember that dance song, we was cutting in the midnight hour, and he came out and he said, well, can you put it in this jerk dance thing? That's how kind of how that delayed 2 came about.
Wexler he was unhappy about something. He said, hey, baby, can you just put it here, baby? Kink, put it here, baby. Hey, put it right, kink. I didn't know, what the hell is this man talking about?
Al and I just started kind of going with him and just kind of laying back, and I just started playing these backbeats, and it probably was one of the most influential sounds that we had because we started cutting a lot of records after Midnight Hour hit with what we call a delayed backbeat.
Pickett's gospel roots, paired with 1965's dance craze, landed Midnight Hour in the charts and paved the way for the even churchier sound of Otis Redding to cross over. Redding had been working as a chauffeur and occasional vocalist for other bands before he embarked on his own solo career.
Otis said he wanted to audition for the record company, and would I play for him? And I said, sure, I'll play for you. So we walked over to the organ, and he started singing These Arms of Mine, and I was just really moved by the way he sang it, and I was just mostly listening rather than playing, and I felt that I was involved in something good and something significant, and it was always the same with Otis. He always moved me when he sang.
Oh, she may be weary. Young girls, they do get wearied wearing that same old
baggy dress. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But when she gets weary, try a little tenderness. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, man, I know she's waiting, just anticipating a thing that she'll never, never, never possess. No, no. But while she's there waiting, try just a little bit of tenderness.
Otis Redding came in. And when he came in, it changed, well, the lyrics and the way that he presented his version of his music. Now he wanted it to go, which turned out to be not gravelly like mine and not rhythm and blues like the others. So that's how soul, I feel like, was slowly gotten into.
In the spring of 1967, while much of rock and roll was being transformed by the emerging hippie culture, the Stax Review took music rooted in the churches of Black America to a new and appreciative audience in Europe.
We sold out every place we went. We broke all attendance records. You know, we didn't go into, at that time it was the stadiums, but we were playing the small venues and we were packing them out because they had never, you know, that gospel thing.
Do me a favor before I go. Do me a favor before I go. Do me a favor. Will you do me a favor? Yeah. Do me a favor. Yeah. Do me a favor. Yeah. Do me a favor. Do me a favor.
To get an audience that involved, to tell them to stand up, do me a favor and get up. At first, you saw the reluctant, like, they weren't really sure, you know, and this guy started with this thing, get up, he's kept, it's like hypnotizing, you know, I'm chanting, get up, do me a favor, get up. You know, we would just stand up there shaking and doing the holy, as they call it, the holy dance. You know, you slide it and shift your body all the way across the stage on one leg, all the way across, and that's something I got out of church.
I was apprehensive and very leery of exposing Otis Redding to the thousands of flower children. And here were the Jefferson Airplane. They looked like they were playing with 20-foot Marshall amps. And the Grateful Dead doing their long boogies. And here comes Booker T and the MGs. And they've got their little Sears Roebuck amps and this tiny sound.
Thank you so much. All right, now.
Well, I don't think we really knew what to expect until we got there. And that was a bit of a shock treatment.
What was it? I mean, we're out there in our green mohair suits, you know, and when we thought it was a job, you know, and then everybody's out there in these flowers, you know, the flowers around, you know, and all these flowered shirts. And I said, holy George, I said, the world's coming to an end.
What an incredible performance he gave that night. In the middle of the performance, the police chief came to me and he said, everyone was out of their seats, standing on the chairs. He said, I'm going to stop the show right now if they don't sit down immediately. So I went to Otis and, you know, in my white boy way, I said, Otis, you've got to let everybody stay in their chairs, be seated and behave and listen to the teacher because they got to stop the show. So Otis said, this is the love crowd, right? And he said, yeah, yeah. He said, well, if you love me, sit down. And they all sat down, went on with the show. There's no more problem.
This is the love crowd, right? We all love each other, don't we? Am I right? Let me hear you say yeah then. All right. I've been loving you just a little bit too long, and I don't want to stop now. No, 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 and don't make me stop now. Oh, have mercy.
Playing the Monterey Festival had been a gamble for Otis Redding, one which no other soul act had been prepared to take, but one which paid off. His triumphant appearance suggested that he was about to attract an even wider following. Tragically, it was to be almost his last major performance. 6 months later, while traveling to a club date in Wisconsin, his plane crashed, killing all on board.
I love you. Good God Almighty. Good God Almighty. I love
Mustang Sally. Guess you better slow your Mustang down.
125 miles southeast of Memphis, deep in the heart of the Bible Belt and a stronghold of the Ku Klux Klan, some other great soul songs were coming out of a studio in the backwater town of Muscle Shoals. Called Fame, the studio was run by a former country fiddle player.
It was tough. You got to remember, this was in the 60s. And this was when George Wallace was standing in the schoolhouse door at the University of Alabama. It's when the National Guard came to Arkansas. These are tough times, and they didn't, black people I had no problem with. If I had a problem with anybody, it was white people who didn't like me socializing or recording black music in Alabama with this all going on.
Percy Sledge's When a Man Loves a Woman brought the sound of Muscle Shoals to the attention of Jerry Wexler, who once again was looking for a southern studio for his singers after falling out with Stax.
I gets off the plane, Southern Airlines, and here this long, tall, white man, we call him Peckerwoods, you know, back in. He walks up like he'd known me for 500 years. Hey, Wilson, come on, we're gonna cut some fucking records. Boy, we're gonna really cut some records. Come on, Wilson, come on. I said, wait, I'm nervous, you know what I mean? Now, what does white man know about producing a Wilson Pickett? Well, I'm telling you, I'm gonna show you the studio. I'm gonna show you, well, we went through the cotton patch, people still picking cotton. Out there, I said, is that what I see what I think it is? Yeah, Wilson, they're still picking cotton down there. We still picking cotton. This studio was right over, you could see a studio from the cotton patch.
You know I feel all right. And I have to tell you this, we cut Mustang Sally all at funky Broadway, the land of 1,000 whole dances. Nah, 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 nah. Come on, y'all, let's say it one more time. Nah, 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 nah,
These players in Muscle Shoals were all Caucasians. This seems to confound perceived wisdom and all the logic of the music professors and the commentators. How could authentic soul music and blues come out of a situation like this?
We get accused of being country fans. Now, I don't know, Spooner might have been into it a little bit, but I think David and I basically came from listening to Jimmy Reed and Bo Diddley and Chuck Berry.
That sort of thing, that was one form, and of course the Ray Charles on the other side, the rhythm and blues side, that was wonderful for me to hear. And then there was the Grand Ole Opry, you know. All those things were coming at me at once, so I took it all in.
In January 1967, the homespun studio band in Muscle Shoals aided in the birth of a superstar when Jerry Wexler brought down a Detroit artist he'd just signed to Atlantic.
I didn't know who Aretha was. The only thing I knew was that her father was the Reverend Franklin, who I listened to at WLAC in Nashville, coming home from gigs a lot of nights.
You are to reap. Yes. If you anticipate failure, believe me, you're going to fail.
I knew it was his daughter, and she'd been a secret almost in the music business. She'd never had, I don't think, even a mediocre hit at the time with CBS. They didn't know what to do with her.
When you went and left me there crying, your goodbye was even colder than ice. It didn't bother you, I was crying. And now you want to break my heart twice.
I was having what was called turntable hits. Turntable hits are records that get a lot of play, but they did not garner a lot of sales. We wanted hits. Everyone else was having hits, and I didn't have a hit record. And Jerry Wexler had extended the offer of a contract, and we went over to meet with him, and that is when I signed with Atlantic Records in 1967.
When they heard the news that Wexler had signed her, Aretha's arrival at Muscle Shoals was eagerly awaited by the production team.
I recall we started recording, I think, 10, 11 o'clock, which we usually did. And the musicians, the studio was full of musicians. We had them 3 deep in the, out in the lobby, meaning that if the bass player, we had 3 bass players, if one couldn't cop the lick, we'd bring in another one and fire him. That's how important the sessions were. When Aretha came in and sat down at the piano, Spooner Oldham was playing electric piano, Wurlitzer. And I've always thought, and I think Aretha would agree to this, that his little part that he was playing was so important to the record that everybody just kind of fell into his groove.
When we played that song, in my mind I thought, well, it doesn't have a specific meter, really. So the band just sort of looked at each other after it's finished, like, well, what do we do? I mean, where do we go now? So we were just all basically off in our little worlds trying to figure a rhythm or a riff. And I just happened to be the one that, I guess, formulated this little pattern, and it started.
You're no good, heartbreaker. You're a liar and you're a cheat. And I don't know why I let you do these things to me.
Everybody was a little uptight, including myself. I was a nervous wreck because Wexler was standing over my shoulder always when I'm engineering. I believe Tom was here, Tom Dowd, sitting over there someplace, and between the two of them and the directions I were getting, I was, you know, no, turn him up, turn him down. Wait a minute, you're losing the singer. Wait a minute, bring up the horn. The guitar's wiping everything out, you know, and then we didn't have sliders in those days. We had turn pots, you know, you turned them up and down. So it was an exciting, very exciting time.
There was a ruckus. One of the horn players and Aretha's then husband, Ted White, got into it. Well, the session blew up, and instead of staying there for a week to complete the whole album, everybody went back where they came from. Ted and Aretha went to Detroit, I went to New York. I had this wonderful record. It was finished, and I Never Loved a Man. And I had a three-piece track on the B-side called Do Right Woman. We cut the acetates on I Never Loved a Man and sent out to disc jockeys, and it was a tidal wave response. And our distributors and the store said, let's have the record. No record. We had no B-side. And it took me quite a while, a couple of weeks, to find Aretha. Well, we found her. She came to New York with her sisters. She and her sisters finished this record with no other help.
Show some respect for me if you wanna do right,
When it was finally released in the spring of 1967, I Never Loved a Man, backed by Do Right Woman, went straight to the top of the charts.
I take great pleasure in presenting to you the Cashbox Achievement Award for 1967. You finished first in singles, first on albums, and first in rhythm and blues.
Back in her hometown, Aretha celebrated with Martin Luther King himself.
And whereas Detroit is proud of its native daughter, and whereas she's everybody's soul sister, therefore I, Jerome P. Kavanaugh, Mayor of the City of Detroit, do hereby proclaim Friday, February the 16th as Aretha Franklin Day.
The decade that had begun with Berry Gordy carefully polishing songs for white middle-class taste had reached a point when music with deep African-American roots was being embraced the world over.
It looked as though soul was now the imprint, was now the rubric forever. But I had a hunch, and I even told my partner, I think it was maybe 68 or 69, I said, I have a feeling this is going to grind to a shuddering halt. I felt new things happening. One thing is what you call the rising aspirations of the inner city, that they were looking toward other things than this kind of so-called religious church-based music. There was a new spirit. It was more secular. But of course, the thing that really seemed to cap it was the assassination of Dr. King.
When we got the news, we were in the recording studio here recording. I don't recall what song we were doing, but the whole mood and the whole atmosphere in the studio suddenly changed. And the session went downhill, and we called off the session, in fact, out of respect to him and everything. But and I'm not sure that the mood of black music didn't change along with that night.
From that point on, the rhythm and blues acts slowly stopped coming to work with us after that night. I do remember that, and it was a sad occasion in a lot of respects for us.
There was a different attitude. The dreamer had died, and many of us who had lived that, we really wondered if the dream had died with the dreamer. So some of that was reflected, or a good deal of that was reflected in our attitudes, and of course that was reflected in how the songs were written, and how we sang the songs, and how we related to each other.
It was about 2 days after Dr. King was killed, and this police car passes, you know, and me being the only white guy was standing around and about six, you know, 6 black guys, and all of a sudden, cop car stops and pulls up and says, you okay? Oh, man, I just wanted to melt. I mean, you know, I'm sitting here with my best friends, you know.
Going to Stax was like going to church for me every day. Absolutely. I couldn't wait to get up in the morning and get back there. I used to work 15, 16 hours a day at Stax. But somehow after that happened, it all kind of changed. Everybody was a little more serious about life and things, and particular about stuff.
Because when the wind and the wind's drill right now, but all we need is you, Jesus, to linger right there.
When Aretha sang at the funeral, it seemed a turning point for the generation of musicians who, like her, had built on the gospel legacy of optimism and respect. On the night after the assassination in 1968, with riots expected in major cities, a live tribute concert was broadcast.
All of us are here tonight to listen to a great talent, James Brown. But we're also here to pay tribute to one of the greatest Americans, Dr. Martin Luther King.
James Brown's uncompromising rhythmic sound and politics were to point to a new direction for black music. For many black artists, as the 60s came to a close, crossing over had become less important than making a statement of identity and independence.
We are black. Our noses are broad. Our lips are thick. Our hair is nappy. And we are beautiful. And we are beautiful. And we are beautiful. And we are beautiful. Yes.
Motown abandoned Hitsville after race riots tore Detroit apart, and Berry Gordy moved his operation to Hollywood. The original gospel-inspired dream was over.